This is my true story. After my husband passed away, all I wanted was to live the rest of my days quietly, surrounded by my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchildren. But what I got was something else, something cold. One day I fell down the stairs. My son didn't help me. He laughed, he recorded it, and then showed it to his friends. That was the moment I realized I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a joke, but I didn't cry. I called my lawyer, and what happened next? Destroyed everything they thought was safe. But first, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments and subscribe. From the day my son was born, I gave my whole life to him. I was not a wealthy woman, but I gave him what money could not buy: time, sacrifice, and love. After my husband died, I carried the weight of the world alone. I worked long hours, I saved every penny, and I made sure my son never went without food, clothes, or education. There were nights when I cried quietly in my bed, missing the man I had lost, but I would wipe my tears and get up because my son needed me. He was my reason to live, my reason to fight through the pain of being widowed so young. When he was a boy, I spoiled him in every way I could, not with luxuries, but with love. I packed his lunches, I stayed up late sewing his school uniforms, and I clapped the loudest at his sports games. I still remember the way his eyes lit up when I surprised him with a birthday cake, even if it was small. He used to hug me tight and say, "You're the best mom." Those words meant more to me than any riches. I thought that bond would last forever. As he grew older, I sacrificed even more. I gave him my savings when he wanted to go to college. I helped him buy his first car. When he got married, I opened my purse again to help with the wedding expenses. Even when I didn't have much, I gave it all to him. I thought it was natural. Isn't that what mothers do? They give and give and give. And I believed, deep in my heart, that one day he would look back and realize how much I had done for him. That one day, when I was old and weak, he would return the love and protection I had poured into him. When his children were born, I became a second mother to them. I rocked them to sleep when he and his wife were tired. I cooked meals, washed clothes, and cared for their homes so they could rest. My back ached, my hands shook, but I did it with joy because I wanted to help. I thought the family house, the one my husband and I worked so hard to build, would remain a place of love. I believed it was the symbol of our family, the roof under which generations would live, laugh, and take care of one another. Even when money was tight, even when I had nothing left for myself, I gave. I poured myself into making sure my son had every opportunity to succeed, and I thought he would never forget. I thought my sacrifices would bind us together forever. I thought, foolishly, that he would always see me as his mother, not as a burden. It did not happen all at once. At first, my son still showed bits of warmth, still said thanks when I helped with the children, still hugged me on holidays. But slowly, something changed. His tone grew colder, his words sharper. The son I had raised with love began to look at me as if I were in the way. When I walked slowly across the room, he would sigh loudly, tapping his foot, as if my age was an inconvenience to him. If I asked him to repeat something because my hearing was not as sharp as before, he would roll his eyes and mutter, "You're going deaf." Little by little, respect was replaced by impatience. The first time he mocked my shaky hands, I laughed nervously, hoping he was joking. I had been carrying a plate of food, and my fingers trembled a little. He smirked and said, "Careful, old woman, don't drop it." His wife laughed too, covering her mouth but not enough to hide her smile. That laughter stung me more than the words themselves. They no longer saw me as the mother who had sacrificed everything, but as someone fragile, useless, and easy to mock. It became a pattern. Whenever I walked too slowly up the stairs, he would shout behind me, "Come on, hurry up!" His wife began to join in, calling me dead weight when she thought I couldn't hear. But I always heard. I heard every word. I carried those insults quietly inside me, never answering back, praying that maybe tomorrow would be better. At family dinners, I felt like a ghost at my own table. They spoke around me, not to me. When I tried to join in the conversation, my son would interrupt or talk over me. Once, when I tried to tell a story from when he was a boy, he cut me off. "No one wants to hear that, Mom." His friends laughed, and I lowered my head in silence. The memory I wanted to share, the story of love and sacrifice, became another stone of humiliation. I told myself I could endure it. I told myself that children forget the weight their parents once carried, but that deep down, there is still love. I prayed at night for patience. I prayed that one day he would wake up and remember who I was, what I had done. I kept quiet, even when the pain in my chest was heavier than the pain in my knees. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. My son no longer saw me as a mother. He saw me as a burden, and my daughter-in-law, instead of softening his heart, only hardened it further. Together, they turned the house I had once seen as my legacy into a place of quiet cruelty. One afternoon, the truth of their cruelty showed itself in full. I was climbing the stairs, slowly as always, holding the rail to steady my weak legs. My knees ached with every step, but I kept going. Halfway up, my foot slipped. My body lurched forward, and before I could catch myself, I tumbled down. The world spun as I hit the steps, my arms scraping against the wood, my back slamming hard. I cried out in pain, certain that my son would rush to help me. But when I looked up, he was standing there with his phone in his hand. Instead of reaching out, instead of calling my name in concern, he lifted the phone higher and recorded me. He laughed loudly as I lay on the floor, struggling to breathe through the pain. "Look at the old lady," he shouted between bursts of laughter. "Down she goes." The laughter cut deeper than the bruises on my arms and the sharp ache in my ribs. I tried to sit up, my whole body trembling, but all I could hear was his voice echoing in the hallway, mocking me. Not one step did he take toward me. Not one hand did he offer. Instead, he held the phone steady, making sure he captured every second of my humiliation. I lay there for what felt like an eternity. My heart hurt more than my bones. I wanted to scream at him, to ask why, but no words came out. I realized then that I was no longer his mother in his eyes. I was nothing but a source of amusement, something to laugh at, to record, to share. When he finally walked away, still chuckling, I dragged myself slowly to a chair, every movement sending pain through my body. I held my chest, trying to steady my breath, and tears filled my eyes. But they were not just tears of pain. They were tears of betrayal. A mother spends her life protecting her child, but when it was my turn to need protection, my son stood by and mocked me. That moment broke something inside me. I had endured the sighs, the mocking words, the cold stares, but this was different. This was not impatience or disrespect. This was cruelty. He had laughed while I fell, and worse, he had recorded it. My own suffering had become his entertainment. And as I sat there shaking, I knew one truth. I would never forget this day. That night, the wound in my body still throbbed, but the wound in my heart hurt more. I had hoped, foolishly, that maybe his laughter had been nervous, that maybe shame would come afterward. But I was wrong. I heard voices from the living room. His friends gathered around, their laughter rising like cruel music. I walked quietly to the doorway and froze. My son was showing them the video. On the screen, I saw myself falling down the stairs, arms flailing, body crashing against the steps. My son replayed it over and over, laughing louder each time. "Watch this part," he said, pointing, his eyes shining with pride. His friends chuckled, some covering their mouths, others laughing openly. One of them said, "Man, that's brutal." But none of them stopped him. None of them told him it was wrong. They laughed at my pain as if it were a comedy show. I stood hidden in the hallway, my heart breaking. My son's voice, so full of mockery, echoed in my ears. Not once did he call me mom. Not once did he say I was hurt or that I needed help. To him, I was not his mother anymore. I was a joke, a source of entertainment. Tears filled my eyes, hot and bitter. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from crying out, but inside, something was changing. My sorrow was turning cold. My love, the love I had carried for decades, was hardening into something else. Anger, fury, resolve. As I turned away from that doorway, I knew I could no longer pray for respect. I could no longer hope for kindness. My son had crossed a line from which there was no return. He had humiliated me not just in private, but in public, stripping me of my dignity, laughing at my suffering with strangers. And as I went to my room, closing the door behind me, I whispered to myself, "This will not end with laughter. I will make sure of that." As I sat alone in my room that night, tears drying on my face, another truth returned to me, one my son had long forgotten. The house he and his wife claimed as theirs, the walls they decorated, the rooms they filled with their voices, it was not theirs at all. The deed was still in my name. I had never signed it over, never handed away the legal right. In his arrogance, he believed the house belonged to him already, that it would simply pass into his hands when I was gone. He had forgotten that nothing in life is guaranteed, especially respect that is never earned. I looked around at the old photos hanging on the walls, pictures of my husband and me when we were young, building this house with our own hands, brick by brick. Pictures of my son as a boy, smiling with missing teeth, playing in the yard I planted with flowers. This house was more than walls. It was a legacy, a symbol of every sacrifice my husband and I made. And yet here I was, treated as an intruder in the very home we built. My son walked through these halls as if they were his kingdom, forgetting the truth. It was mine. He and his wife had mocked me, dismissed me, laughed at me, but they had built their lives on something that did not belong to them. Every night they slept under this roof, it was because I allowed it. Every meal they cooked in this kitchen, it was because my name was on the papers. He had mocked me for being old and weak, but in this one fact, I held all the power. As I thought about the laughter from earlier, about the way he showed my pain like it was a trophy, my sorrow grew colder, sharper. I realized then that I no longer had to endure this humiliation. I no longer had to beg for respect that would never come. I held the key to ending it all, the deed, the name, the truth. My son believed I was powerless. He believed I was just an old woman too weak to climb the stairs. But what he didn't know was that I still had the one thing he wanted most, the house. And with that truth, I knew exactly how I would destroy him. That night, while the house was silent and everyone slept, I sat awake with my plan forming clearly in my mind. His cruelty had given me the very weapon I needed. He thought the video of me falling was a joke, something to show his friends for laughs, but in truth, it was the proof of everything he had become. It was not just my humiliation, it was his shame, captured forever in his own hands. I waited until the deep rhythm of his snoring filled the house. Then, with quiet steps, I entered the living room where he had left his phone charging. My hands trembled slightly, but not with fear. This time, it was with purpose. I unlocked his phone easily. I knew the passcode because I had watched him type it carelessly so many times. I scrolled to the gallery and found it quickly. The video, the sound of his laughter poured from the phone as I pressed play. There I was, falling, crying out, struggling in pain. And there he was, holding the phone steady, laughing like a child at a circus. My heart ached, but I forced myself to watch it again. I wanted to feel the weight of it, to remind myself why I could not forgive this. Then, with steady hands, I copied the video onto a small USB drive I had kept in my drawer. I tucked it away in my pocket like a piece of treasure, not because it showed my suffering, but because it showed his cruelty. It was undeniable proof, recorded in his own voice, with his own laughter. Proof that would make sure no one could ever defend him. When I returned the phone to its place, I stood still for a long moment, listening to the silence of the house. He slept peacefully, unaware that his pride, his arrogance, his laughter had become the very tool I would use to destroy him. For years I had no weapon against his words, no way to defend myself against his disrespect. But now I had evidence. Evidence that spoke louder than any story, louder than any tear. And I decided then, I would not let this video be forgotten. I would use it. I would turn his mockery into justice. The very next morning, I dressed carefully and placed the USB drive in my handbag. My body still ached from the fall, but my steps were firm with determination. I did not tell my son where I was going. I simply said I needed some air and walked out the door. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of fear lifting from me. I was not walking in weakness anymore. I was walking with purpose. When I arrived at my lawyer's office, he looked surprised to see me. He had known me for years, handling small matters for me after my husband passed away. But when he saw my face, he knew something serious had happened. "Sit down," he said gently. "Tell me everything." With trembling hands, I handed him the USB drive. I told him about the mocking, the insults, the slow change from love to cruelty. I told him about the fall, about the laughter that pierced me deeper than any bruise. I told him how my son had shown the video to his friends, replaying my pain as if it were entertainment. My lawyer listened in silence, his face growing darker with every word. Finally, I asked him to play the video. The sound filled the office, the crash of my fall, my cry of pain, and then my son's laughter, loud and cruel. My lawyer paused the video halfway, shaking his head slowly. "This," he said, "is more than proof of neglect. This is proof of abuse and humiliation. You are not powerless. You have every legal right to take action." His words steadied me. For years I had felt trapped, like my son controlled everything, like my old age made me helpless. But here was a man of law telling me that the power was still mine. He reminded me that the house deed was in my name, that legally it had never belonged to my son. "If you want to remove him and his wife from that property," my lawyer said firmly, "you can. And with this video, there will be no doubt that you are right to do so." I sat there, breathing slowly as his words sank in. All the years of humiliation, all the nights I prayed for respect, all the times I bit my tongue in silence, they led to this moment. My son had given me the evidence. My lawyer had given me the path. Now, it was my choice to take it. I looked at him and said with a steady voice I didn't know I still had, "Prepare the papers. I want them out. I want my house back." And he nodded. "We'll move quickly. This will be airtight." As I left the office, the USB drive now safely in his hands, I felt lighter. For the first time, I wasn't the helpless old woman they mocked. I was the mother who had finally decided enough was enough. Once the decision was made, everything moved fast. My lawyer did not waste a single day. Papers were drafted, signatures were written, and legal steps were followed with precision. The house my son believed was his kingdom was placed on the market quietly, and within days a private buyer stepped forward. I signed the documents with steady hands, each stroke of the pen cutting my son's future away from him. At the same time, eviction notices were filed. They were not cruel or unlawful. They were legal, proper, undeniable. My lawyer assured me that no argument, no shouting, no threat could undo what had been signed. My son thought he had power over me, but in reality, I had the law behind me, and now I had the proof of his cruelty too. The video sat safely in my lawyer's possession, ready to surface if he ever tried to fight back. The timing was perfect. On the day the sale was finalized, my son and his wife were away at work. I packed my small belongings quietly, not because I was leaving in defeat, but because I was leaving in triumph. I didn't take much, only what mattered to me. A few photographs, my clothes, my husband's watch. The rest belonged to the house, and soon the house would belong to someone else. By the time my son returned home that evening, everything had changed. The locks were no longer his. The papers no longer bore my name alone. They bore the buyer's. He stood on the porch, confused, angry, shouting my name. I watched from a distance as the realization began to sink in. The house he laughed in, the house he claimed as his, was gone. I did not answer his calls that night. I did not explain. I didn't need to. The strike had already landed, clean and final. The house was no longer his future. It was mine to give away, and I had given it to someone who would never use it as a stage for cruelty. For the first time in years, I felt no fear. The game was over, and I had won. The day after the sale, the storm began. My son came to my door with rage in his eyes, pounding his fists, shouting words that shook the walls. "How could you do this? This is my house. You can't take it away from me." His wife stood behind him, her face twisted in anger, yelling insults that cut like knives. But no matter how loud they screamed, the truth did not change. The house was no longer theirs. When they tried to threaten me, I reminded them calmly that the video was in my lawyer's hands. "Do you really want the world to see you laughing while your own mother fell down the stairs?" I asked quietly. The color drained from his face. He knew then that he was trapped. His own cruelty had built the cage he now stood in. For days the phone calls poured in, first angry, then desperate, then begging. He shouted about betrayal, about how I had ruined his life. But every time I listened to his voice, I remembered the sound of his laughter as I lay broken on the floor. I remembered the way he showed that video to his friends, and each memory hardened me. I didn't return his calls. I didn't answer his pleas. I let him sit in the silence he had created for himself. The news spread quickly among the family. Some shook their heads, shocked by what had happened. Others whispered that it was justice, that my son had gone too far, and that I had finally stood up for myself. Not one person who saw the video defended him. His laughter condemned him more than my words ever could. Soon, the house was filled with strangers, the new owners who had bought it legally and fairly. My son drove by often, sitting in his car outside, staring at the place he once thought was his future. But he could not touch it anymore. His arrogance had cost him everything. And me? I walked away with my dignity. For the first time in years, I felt powerful again. My revenge had not been with shouting or violence. It had been with silence, patience, and the law. My son had thought my age made me weak, but in the end, it was his cruelty that made him powerless. Now I live in a smaller home of my own choosing, one without stairs, one where I can move freely without fear or humiliation. The walls are quiet, the rooms are warm, and for the first time in many years, I feel safe. I bought it with the money from the sale of the old house, the same house my son thought would always belong to him. I filled this new place not with his cruelty, but with peace. My days are calm now. I wake to the sound of birds instead of harsh voices. I cook in a kitchen that is truly mine, not one where every meal was met with complaints or mocking laughter. When I sit by the window with my tea, I no longer wonder if I will be called dead weight. Instead, I breathe deeply, knowing I made the right choice. Sometimes, I still see the image of myself falling down the stairs, the moment my son laughed instead of helping. That memory will never leave me. But when it comes, I remind myself of what followed. His laughter became my strength. His cruelty became my evidence. His arrogance became the key to his own downfall. I do not feel guilt. I do not feel sorrow for what I did. For years, I gave him everything: my money, my labor, my love, my home. And when he gave me nothing but humiliation, I took back what was mine. I gave myself dignity again. The final thought that rests in my heart is simple. He laughed when I fell. I laughed when he lost everything.